Good evening. Assalamu alaikum to the final session. And I'm going to pull up my screen, my slides, sorry. So for tonight, again, we will be recording only the lecture portion of this class, not the small group discussion. And it's going to be, again, a combination of lectures and one small group that we will have. The first portion that I will be presenting is only, a review from last week, and just to I feel like it's a lot of new information, and I would like for us to just, recapture some of it. It's always helpful. It's actually a method from the Quran. Repetition yields results. And as people trickle in, you don't miss anything. It's not a new material, but just for us to look back and to process a little bit together about the concept of Tawheed. And then in the second portion, after the small group, when you come back, we'll be talking about the Quran's view on the religious other, specifically, the Quran's assessment of religious diversity in the world and our particular context, because we live in an interreligious context, and how Muslim conduct and behaviors are informed by that Quranic assessment of the religious other, of that, interreligious, understanding. So tonight I'm going to also trouble the waters a little bit. I mean, you had a chance to look at the, at that short piece, Allah, the same God as the biblical God. That's the question that we've started. And as I said in the beginning, I'm trying to approach that question from a Muslim perspective, from a Quranic perspective, from the perspective of the Islamic understanding, and how the Quran responds to the question if we are talking about the same being or not. And as you were walking through the course, you already had this kind of internal, processing and reflection. There are things that sound similar, but oh, this is different here. And so each of us already making those internal comparisons, but it's helpful to know how the Islamic tradition approaches the question of religious difference, right? And so that's an important question. So for tonight, our plan is to look at this concept of Tawheed again, then go into small groups, and then look more closely at this question of the title, Allah. Is it really the same biblical God or not, right? From a scriptural perspective. So last week, as you remember, I tried to explain a little bit the concept of the oneness of God, which in Islam is called Tawheed. Monotheism is basically understood as Tawheed, the belief in one God. It's to declare and connect to God's oneness, right? And so we've talked about this in the light of the most beautiful names of God that are mentioned in the Quran. And again, to remember, for Muslims, the Quran is the normative source, is the most authoritative source, because for Muslims, God speaks in the Quran. God is the author of the Quran, right? Muhammad is the mouthpiece of God. It's not his words, but what the Quran says is, for Muslims, becomes authority because it's the divine word, right? So God's self-expression and how he wants to be understood. So in order to understand God, Muslims go back to the Quran, and we've looked at the concept of Tawheed and these list of names that are not definite, right? Not definite, and the 99 names of God are basically the infinite names, most infinite names of God, right? So they are not 99 in a literal sense, but God's names are many, many more than that. They go beyond the number 99. So some of these names you already had, a look, and you were able to look at, at the Muslim supplication, for example, for tonight, which had a lot of Arabic words, and don't worry about it, but I just wanted you to get a sense of how Muslims pray to God and how they incorporate these names as they pray to God, how they call upon God. And so it's not a requirement that you all know about these different Islamic terms, but it gives you a sense of how Muslim in their prayer language, in their prayer life, connect to the names of God, right? And then to remember and call upon these specific names, as the Quran actually invites them to do. Call upon God by the most beautiful names. So for my specific needs, or every Muslim, depending on their specific needs, they call on certain names, right? If they, for example, if a person is sick, going through some mental health challenge or physical health challenge, they call upon God the healer, right? The one who heals all emotional distress or physical illness and, provides the cure and all of that. So specific names that are coming through an experiential understanding, right? So a human being knows and learns through the experience in their own personal life to have a better understanding of God's names. So if I'm hungry, right, that's an experiential understanding, an experiential awareness of God as the provider, the nourisher, or the sustainer. It's a very deep kind of understanding and learning and awareness and God consciousness, because then I hold on to God as the nourisher, right, and the compassionate. Because I understand when I'm hungry, it's God who's feeding me, right, like providing these blessings. So I usually in the past, I've employed this example of the apple. And remember, maybe some of you remember from previous classes, when I use the apple, right, as something that, so it becomes less abstract. So the Quran talks about all the beings, all creation as signs of God, right? Signs that display those names of God and these qualities. So if we take the apple, right, Mr. Apple, my teaching assistant tonight, is a sign of God, right? And displaying certain names of the divine. So the apple is already a sacred being, has sanctity in the eyes of Muslims, in the eyes of the Quran. This apple is a sign having a significance, as a sign already says, pointing to the divine, reflecting something about the divine, telling us something about God, right? And again, to remember the whole activity of Iqra, of reading these names that are displayed in the universe, in the book of the universe. So when we look at the apple, right, we see that there is life, right? So an apple can also has a beginning and an ending, and an apple can decay. Obviously you can have rotten apples. So there is this understanding that life exists because there's also death involved, right? So the apple can also die, but we see that it's coming into existence. Somebody created this apple. But in order for this apple to exist, you have to bring so many scattered elements in the universe together, which means that there's somebody who compels the different elements in the universe to come together, which is another name of God, the subduer, the compeller, for this apple to come to life, to existence. We know the apple needs rain, sunshine, certain minerals need soil, right? It needs the seasons in order to exist. It needs, a certain degree of heat and all of that. But who compels those very unique elements in the universe to come into a certain position is God, the compeller, right? So this apple reflects that too, right? So that's one name that is also coming then, into display, or becomes visible then for the one who engages in a careful reading of these names. We also know that the apple is designed with knowledge, right? There's something who has wisdom and is knowledgeable about how to design and how to create the apple and how to, equip it and create it with the vitamins and the different, elements that the human body also needs, right? And so there is a wisdom at play, a knowledge at play, which is also displayed through this particular sign, right? Through the apple. So God, the one who is wise, God is the knower, the one who is knowledgeable. We also identify shape, right? Somebody is fashioning the apple, somebody is coloring the apple, somebody is beautifying the apple, right? And God is the shaper, the fashioner. These names are mentioned in the Quran. So there's, somebody paid attention to the creation of the apple. And then again, the apple has a purpose also, right? So somebody created the apple and answering the needs of human beings, providing and nourishing the human body, sustaining it. And so that's also there, because we know an apple a day keeps a doctor away, right? As I tell my kids. So somebody in their compassion, you also see, those of us who visit, the farms around us, we witness there are so many different types of apples out there, right? So many different flavors, so many different textures, Fuji, Honeycrisp, you name it. And those are the ones that I've only seen here. But then there's so many other different sorts of apples with different flavors and sweet, sour, you name it. And then, so there is compassion at play, obviously, right? The apple tells you somehow, right, that there's one who thinks of the human being and who not only provides one sort of apple, but numerous types and numerous flavors, which expresses a sort of compassion and love towards the human being. There are some humans who prefer Granny Smith. There are some humans who prefer Honeycrisp. And so to all of these specific needs and preferences, God is answering in his compassion and to his love. So that's also something that the apple displays, God's compassion and God's generosity, because technically, or theoretically, you would only need one type of apple, but you see again this vast generosity, like every year, the creation is showered with all these blessings. There's always a season where fruits are harvested and all of that. So somebody is answering to these needs, even if they're not verbally articulated, but they are the needs of the body. They are the needs of, so many beings. And so there's somebody who is actively answering to these needs, somebody who hears, somebody who sees, somebody who understands, right? So, and then also equipping the human body in a way, especially with, a piece of flesh that is, capable to discern all these like various different flavors and, see the intricate kind of a difference in every little thing and every little taste. So it's almost like a scale, right? Our sense of taste and sense of smell, the smell and the taste of an apple and all of this. This is unique to the human being. And so that is also an expression, of course, of the most compassionate. And then we know also that the right food is also healing, preventive, like that it's a cure for a lot of diseases. In fact, a lot of many things in Islamic medicine, for example, focus on preventive medicine. That what to take in, that the Quran talks about wholesome food and food that is not being processed, and pure food, all of that, what we take in, what we take in into our bodies and how it is processed and all of that is highly important. So what comes out pure from the earth then also has a healing function. So provision also has this, especially, when you think about the apple and all the fruits and the blessings, has a healing function too. So that's also another name. Then we also see that the apple is protected, preserved. The seeds, if you analyze carefully, they always like in the deepest, like in the middle, but kind of hidden even. Like my daughter and I were trying to find the seeds, but they were so like beautifully protected and kept almost very secure. And so the apple is also has the capacity to bear another tree or many trees, right? So it's beautifully protected, preserved. And it makes you think, if somebody like gives so much attention to the apple to protect and preserve it, how much then to the human being who's really like the most elevated creation in God's universe, right? So, and it's also protected in a sense and preserved when we think of the name, the protector or preserver. that God also records and keeps a record of everything, right? So the apple decays or is eaten, but the memory of the apple still lasts on. So it's eternalized, which is another name of God, right? God the eternal. So the apple, from a materialistic perspective, is gone, is digested, but the memory of the apple is preserved, right? And so that's also is another way of protecting and preserving the dignity of every being, right? And then also having the DNA, the seeds in the apple, and continuing that life cycle is also another way of protection and preserving every being. And then there's no waste. We know, for example, that compost is absolutely good for the soil, right? Anything in the creation, like it's not wasted, because God is the pure and the holy. And so that's also another name that we see. And then, of course, the next season, apples are, revived. We will receive that they come back into existence, which is another name of God, the resurrector, the reviver. And the Quran talks about that. In the spring season is a season of resurrection, that there are these mini resurrections around us. The cells renew itself, and the eyelashes and the skin and, the hair and all of that, and our body during sleep, that all these, according to scripture, are little mini resurrections. So everything gives news of God's names. It's just the act of reading, right? That needs to be, basically put into activity. And so we also see that all of these names are in perfect harmony, that the apple, again, and everything for the apple to come into existence has to be in a balance and in a very tricky equilibrium. So it's a very complex web of life when we talk about the universe. That also refers to God's justice, the most just. So there is a balance in everything. For Muslims, then, it's an affirmation also of the afterlife. If somebody pays so much attention to the balance and harmony in an apple and the seasons and the universe, then of course, God's justice then will be revealed in the afterlife. So that's the thinking as we think about Tawheed, thinking about a knowledge of God through these divine names. But as I said last time, we don't stop there, right? So that knowledge of the divine names leads to greater awareness, and that awareness should translate into actions, right? So because then you are basically trying to respond to God's love and compassion through your own effort to displaying the divine names, right? So you're trying to, after you've learned that God is the most generous, the most kind, the most compassionate, the most just, the most, the protector, the preserver, that you equally then make an effort to remember God in your own life through these names, to actively trying to display them. And that then ultimately is an expression of gratitude, right? So gratitude is this active disposition, right? That a human being not just says thank you, but in discovering or uncovering that particular name, tries to make an effort to say, I want to respond to that by showing also, by reflecting those names as well, which is then becomes this vast parts of, becomes this a part of this concept of worshiping God, right? Worship of God is really this active remembrance through these divine names and connecting yourself to them. And as I said, this is just really like a tiny example. It could go on forever. But it's the invitation of the Quran to reflect on these names of God and then actively think about them, how they make you transform your own life. And so the whole point of these names is basically also character formation, personal character development, which is called akhlaq, basically tazkiyah. So the purification of the self, that people come, live into these names, and again, they are not personified. They are not. We Muslims never talk that God is within the creation or God is within the person. God is not inside me, because then we come into the danger of pantheism, which is this idea of God within every being. That's a very, very different understanding. From a Muslim standpoint is to understand that God is reflecting his names. He's the source. He claims ownership, right? He's the source of the absolute source of these names. Human beings, through their intention, can become active mirrors, right? Mirroring something, reflecting, which does not mean that the mirror is the sun, right? So that's a big difference. So the point of this is then to acquire spiritual excellence, to be mindful and conscious of God, and to live in that kind of divine presence. So if I can, I will play this because I realized we had music, there will be poetry, but also I wanted to show you the classic, one of the classic location of the most beautiful names. I mean, I quoted it already, but I wanted you also to listen to a Quran recitation. Just checking my time so we have time. And before we go into small, let's see if that works. So if you click on the link, which you will have in the slides later, it will take you to the Quran.com website. It's a very nice website where you can play around, you can listen to different reciters, Quran reciters, or you can put in a keyword and then it will show you all the results. But here we are in chapter 59, verse 22 to 24. And if I click the play button, hopefully you should hear the two last passages. And basically in the translation, you'll hear the Quranic Arabic, but it says, he is God. There is no God worthy of worship except him, nor of the seen and unseen. He is the most compassionate, most merciful. He is God. There is no God except him, the King, the most holy, the all-perfect, the source of serenity, the watcher of all, the almighty, the supreme in might. The majestic, glorified is God, far above what they associate with him in worship. So if you're paying attention, which you do, of course, but the names are mentioned, right? So it's really the attention here is on the names. And here, specifically in the last verse, he is God, the creator, the inventor, the shaper. He alone has the most beautiful names. Whatever is in the heavens and the earth constantly glorifies him. And he is almighty, all wise. So the Quran always mentions a pair of the divine names, and in some passages you have even more than that. So it's a very, very important concept in Islam. So I'll go ahead and get this played. So it's in Arabic. Hopefully you'll be able to hear that. هو الله الذي لا عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله عما يشركون هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. Okay, oops, where's my slide today? So again, you can go back and listen to that again, but I just wanted you to have a look at that website, and then you can, always, depending on what word you're looking, you can always, type in the keyword. But those are some of the verses that deal with the beautiful names. And so, and then there's of course also poetry written by Muslims about the 99 beautiful names. Just to reiterate, 99, not to be taken literally, because 99 only refers to God's infinite beautiful names. And so this is a piece that I found which also tries to convey, basically engage with these divine names of God. So I'm going to go ahead and play that. And then after that, we go into the small groups. There is, of course, Arabic, but the Arabic, it refers to the original, names. But he explains it, of course, what it means. But again, don't feel like overwhelmed if you don't understand everything. But I think you'll get the gist of it. So let's listen in. We have, yes, we have 25 minutes for you. So talk about the example of the Muslim prayer book and how Muslims can pray to God. What are the names that are invoked in that supplication, and what were some of the examples that caught your attention? And how is the human being described in the relationship in that particular example? And going forward, another plus bonus question, if you want, you can already talk about, what's the final verdict? What do you think? And how, what's your sense of looking back at these two sessions and thinking about the names of God? Do Muslims worship a different God, worship the same biblical God? What are some of the differences as you think about the interreligious aspect, the comparative aspect of all of this? But we will take that question into the next section as well. And again, you don't need to answer all of these questions, and feel free to dive in and see how far you can get. So I'll see you back in 25 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. The Zoom magic is happening. Oh, still people trickling in. Okay, so here we are for the final segment. The verdict is out. Same God or not, we'll talk about this. Everybody has made their judgments or made up their mind. But I want to go and look at this question from the perspective of the Quran. So again, which is for Muslims the first authority, right? So when the Quran, or when we think about Muslims and their relationship with other religious communities, so I put up some of these images because they speak to that as well. So you see, for example, I'm Muslim and I love Jesus. I love Moses and Jesus because I'm a Muslim. I love Prophet Muhammad. I love Prophet Jesus and Prophet Moses because I'm a Muslim. And then you have, when the Christmas holiday is coming up, Muslims also recognize that it's a spiritual season. It's a season of remembrance of Jesus. And so you have a Muslim Christmas song and all of that. So it's interesting. It, I think, shows the relationship Muslims have towards especially Prophet Jesus and Prophet Moses, peace be upon him, right? So because the Quran talks about both of them as being messengers of God. So I want to start with some of the foundations, and then as we come closer, you see how the Quran also directs criticism, that certain things, beliefs, ritual practices are viewed as erroneous, as problematic. And so we have this type of criticism that then emerges. But to start off with the foundation, right? When Muslims think about the human family as a whole, or human or differences within humanity, there are some foundational passages that inform a certain worldview, right? A certain conduct. And so I want to start with these very foundational passages, because they set the stage for everything, for the encounter with the religious other. So we read in the Quran that, again, this divine voice tells the reader, for Muslims, it's God who speaks. Indeed, God has honored the children of Adam. So that's a very important statement the Quran makes, right? There's no exceptions, that every human being is dignified in the sight of God, that God has honored and dignified every human being who is a descendant of the Prophet Adam, right? So indeed, we, God, this is the royal we, the royal pronoun. Indeed, we have honored the children of Adam and carried them on land and sea, and granted them good and lawful provisions, and privileged them far above many of our creatures. So in the creational hierarchy, human beings are unique and special in the sight of God, right? Of course, animals are sacred, an apple is sacred, stones, pebbles, mountains, all are servants of God, all are part of this cosmic worship, but at the same time, there is, human beings are the crown of creation. If we just look at their spiritual makeup, if we look at the intellectual abilities, their spiritual capacities, there's just something about human beings that makes them far above other creatures, right? The ability to think and speak and create artistry and display the divine names is far above any of the creatures, right? And so that distinguishes every human being, and that what gives them honor, that they have the ability to display the divine names in a way that is not possible for any other creature, not possible for any other being, right? A human being speaks, thinks, has emotions, is equipped with feelings, has the ability, the capacity to do art, to create art. All of that is very unique for the human species, right? So in that regard, this is foundational as human beings approaches other, to not take away that fundamental dignity and that sacredness of every human being, right? So that is important. And then there are other passages that also reiterate that, "O people, we created you all from a single man and a single woman and made you into races and tribes so that you should get to know one another. In God's eyes, the most honored of you are the ones most mindful of him. God is all knowing, all aware." So again, that, the differences, the racial, the ethnic, the tribal differences, the gender differences, like if you think about women and men, so all this is divinely willed. It's God's design, right? And the purpose of it is to get to know one another. And in another passage, not to despise one another. So that difference is divinely willed. It's a part of God's plan. It's a very important facet in Islamic theology, right? It's not something that is just coincidental. So if something is willed by God, decreed by God, then the human response to that should be to honor that, right? And so this is and to engage with each other in a way that is respectful and respects that dignity of every being. And we are still working on that. We are still working on recognizing the dignity of all and every human life, right? We still talk about racial reckoning, right? We still about, there's tribal issues, your tribe, my party, and this and that, all these kind of very polarized conversations, that to not take away from this basic foundational fact that every human being is honored in the sight of God. And then other verses also talk about this, right? "And of God's signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the diversity of your languages and your colors. Indeed, in that are signs for those of knowledge." So one human family under God, that basic foundational or fundamental dignity of human life is established, cannot be taken away. And that should guide, every encounter, every kind of engagement. That in any dialogue and in any kind of discourse, that this foundational principles need to be not dismissed is key in the Quranic discourse, right? However, the story doesn't end there. Doesn't mean that because God has honored every human being that they are not tasked with a certain responsibility. We talked about that, carrying those, having free will and the capacity to display those divine names is a trust, right? We have the ability to abuse or exploit the divine names. We can also act in accordance with God's will. And so we see, for example, in these verses that there is a dual capacity of human beings, that human beings are created in the best shape, in the best form. Indeed, we created humans in the best form. Like God is, it's God who's talking. Indeed, God created humans in the best form. And God will reduce them to the lowest of the low. So it seems we have this huge positive and constructive capacity to be creative, to be life-giving in the world, but we also can be very low, right? Like human beings can sink very low. Exception are those who believe and do good, right? Who act on this internal conviction. They will have a never-ending reward, which basically means eternal belief in the, eternal reward and eternal happiness, that God will reward those who act according to the divine names, who act according to the tenets of Tawheed, right? Who affirm the belief in one God and then are guided by that belief, guided by that commitment. So other texts speak to other passages also, all humanity. So it's a universal address here. Worship your Lord who created you and those before you so that you may become God conscious. He who has made the earth a place of settlement for you and the sky a canopy, and sends down rain from the sky, causing fruits to grow as a provision for you. So do not knowingly set up equals to God in worship. So that's, again, this vast concept of not associating anything with God, right? Not to claim ownership of the divine names, not to say that I claim greatness, right? Which is also another kind of idol worship. It's worshiping the self, the inner ego, but also that obvious, kind of associating other idols with God and other beings with God, right? Not to take the names of God and assign them to others. So these are the foundational things. So again, one human family, but tasked with a job, with a duty to make a choice, whether being constructive in the world or destructive. That dual capacity exists within human being. It's a free will to choose how they want to be in the world. And then the Quran has this unique, history of prophetic revelation, right? It's basically claims that all these prophets, all these messengers were sent by God with this primordial message, which for Muslims is Islam, right? Islam is free surrender to God, like willing surrender, your willing submission, like you're making a conscious choice to believe in the one God, but also to act, according to that conviction and that commitment. So we hear in many, passages of the Quran, and I put this little picture because Muslims narrate these stories of the prophets to their children and pass on that kind of spiritual legacy. They want, or they name their children according to these prophets, right? It's a prayer so that children become like Prophet Abraham, Prophet Ishmael, Prophet Moses, Jesus. A prophet is not just any, we use that word, that term a lot in our context, but in Islam, a prophet is only someone who is chosen by God. It's not something that you can be or become. Someone who's chosen by God, who only God knows the reasons, right? And who is a moral exemplar for the community, an example of piety and devotion and leadership. So the Quran talks about these messengers who are tasked by God to remind their people about their creator. So we have, I'm having trouble reading this, just a second. Say we believe in God and in what was sent down to us, and what was sent down to Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and the tribes, and what was given to Moses, Jesus, and all the prophets by their Lord. We make no distinction between any of them, and we devote ourselves to him. So again, this idea of this chain of revelation, of this message, of this primordial message of Islam, which is free surrender to God, has been throughout human history that one message, right? That one message that was over and over given to humanity through the messengers. So I'm going to read another verse that speaks that indeed we have sent revelation to you as we sent revelation to Noah and the prophets after him. We also sent revelation to Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and his descendants, as well as Jesus, Job, Jonah, Aaron, and Solomon. And to David we gave the Psalms. There are messengers whose stories we have told you already, and others we have not. And to Moses, God spoke directly. All were messengers delivering good news and warnings, so humanity should have no excuse before God after the coming of the messengers, and God is almighty, all wise. So these messengers of God, who Muslims have to affirm as a package, come to remind humanity of this primordial message. Believe in God, do not go astray. They are only, they are humans, fully human. They're all part of the same chain of revelation. And then according to that narrative, something goes wrong. Human beings become neglectful, forgetful, dismissive. All the complexities. That we get distracted, and then God sends another messenger, and so there are these. That's basically the history of humanity, right? And why these prophets are sent, right? So it sounds very simplistic, but this is the basic understanding. And 28 of these messengers are mentioned in the Quran, but here says there are messengers whose stories we have told you already, and others we have not. So that has actually led Muslim scholars to speculate who are these other prophets that are not mentioned, that God has kept secret. And so there was some, reflection on who could there be? Are there other traditions that, some of their teachings align with Islam or not? So a type of pluralistic strain that you see, there is this kind of thinking about other religious communities and other people, and if they have received divine messengers, which has opened up and I think led Muslims to have a more favorable view of others, right? Because of that possibility. And so that's not to say that, and we'll come to that, but I wanted to say that this kind of element exists within the tradition, right? It has opened up this thought in Muslim scholarship. So all of this is to say that the Psalms, the Gospel, the Quran, the Torah, for Muslims is all part of divine revelation and has to be affirmed as a package. And Prophet Moses, Prophet Jesus, Prophet David, right? Those need to be affirmed part as the Islamic creed. Like you have to, affirm or embrace faith in the messengers of God, all of them, right? And that's why in the beginning you saw these like T-shirts and these these statements, I love Jesus, I love Moses, because Muslims love these messengers, and some of the, many of the prophetic narratives are mentioned in the Quran, and so there is a deep love that exists. And also, if this particular messenger was sent to the people, that also enabled Muslims to have a more amicable relationship with those religious communities, which then historically was the case. If you think of medieval Spain, if you think of 500 years of Jerusalem, if you think of the Christian communities in North Africa and all of that. So it's not that part of it is basically rooted in the Quran, because a lot of that is the favorable view of these religious communities. So this is basically that kind of history, and so those revelations have to be affirmed as part of the divine message, right? These are other passages you can go back to and read again in detail. So you see, for example, the Hajj pilgrimage, or the pilgrimage to Mecca, is basically a reenactment of the Abrahamic rites, is to remember Prophet Abraham, who, according to Muslim belief, built the Kaaba, the holy shrine, with his son, Prophet Ishmael. So it's interesting when Abraham makes this prayer in the Quran to God, it's basically saying, our Lord, make us both fully submit to you, and from our descendants a nation that will submit to you. Show us our rituals and turn to us in grace. You are truly the acceptor of repentance, most merciful. So what's interesting is the term that Prophet Abraham uses is Muslim, right? So it's a pre-Muhammadan, that prehistorical term. So a Muslim is not only one, it does not appear, that term, it does not appear just with Prophet Muhammad, but a Muslim is the one who really surrenders to the one God. So the Quran talks about Abraham being a Muslim, Jesus being a Muslim, Ishmael being a Muslim. So that term has, with a small m, basically denotes this kind of free submission to the one God. So in terms of engaging with religious difference, in terms of for Muslims, then how do we view others' relationship with God? These passages are important because they basically establish this kind of kinship, right? That kind of scriptural kinship. So you see, for example, here, Abraham had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac, and Prophet Muhammad is a descendant of Prophet Ishmael. And we know, for example, St. John of Damascus, who was a famous, early Christian theologian who lived in Syria, but was writing theological treatises under Muslim rule. And one of his famous theological treatises is The Heresy of the Ishmaelites, right? So somebody, a Christian theologian writing under Muslim rule, he's actually working for the Muslim ruler, and writing this interesting theological piece challenging Muslim belief, right? That is how much actually historically Muslims were comfortable with religious difference, right? And so 500 years flourishing along Jews and Christians in Jerusalem, or Jews and Christians in medieval Spain flourishing alongside Muslims, having these very rich theological exchanges are historical facts, right? So that all sounds very nice, but the Quran still says, yes, you all believe in the same God, but also no, some of you have errors, some of you have distorted ideas about me, right? So, and this is also something that needs to be engaged critically. And we have to be honest about these differences and authentic about these differences. So, for example, why is there a need for another revelation if all of it is, just part of the same divine message? Well, the Quran, there is some kind of polemics at play here when you look at some of these passages, some criticism that is employed. And so the invitation is basically look at this and make up your mind, and you have to make a decision, because not both of them, not all of them can be true. So we look at some of these passages, and the Quran says that, gets very upset with the last passage here. They say the most compassionate has offspring. You have certainly made an outrageous claim by which the heavens are about to burst, the earth to split apart, and the mountains to crumble to pieces. So the early Arabs, or the pre-Islamic Arabs, assigned children to God, and the Quran had issue with that, right? So it's not something, pertaining to the Christian belief that Jesus is the Son of God, but even the pre-Islamic Arabs, or the Arabs at that time, were thinking of God having children, and the Quran it's not comfortable with that idea. Because if you think of radical monotheism, as if God is beyond creation, if God is beyond gender, it's unlike his creation, as we already established, right, in the previous sessions, then those views cannot be reconciled with that, right? And so there are theological errors or mistakes that the Quran criticizes. And there's also scriptural errors, right? So Muslims, generally mainstream Muslims, affirm that the previous scriptures were either misinterpreted somehow, or altered, or distorted, right? And that some of it was changed, and is kind of people have changed the original message. And so that is a doctrine of tahrif, alteration or misinterpretation. So for Muslims, the rule of thumb was, if biblical content did not contradict the Quranic content, then they engaged with it. But if there's something that contradicted the Quranic message, then they distanced themselves from it. So that was basically the general approach. So the Quran has issue with some of the passages that were changed in previous scriptures, revelations that are, again, originated in that same kind of source. But then also the idea of God having children, or more specifically, the Quran criticizes the belief in the incarnation, right? So we see, for example, O people of the book, O Jews and Christians, do not go to extremes regarding your faith. Say nothing about God except the truth. The Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, was no more than a messenger of God and the fulfillment of his word. So believing God, so I'm not going to read all of that. And then here, several passages, right? So those who say God is the Messiah, son of Mary, have certainly fallen into disbelief. The Messiah himself said, O children of Israel, And so here also a criticism towards the Jews who did not accept Jesus as a Messiah. So it's a dual kind of criticism. The criticism goes to the Christian community who sees in Jesus the incarnation of God and views him as the Son of God, which of course contradicts with the Quranic idea of God being beyond the creation. But then also criticizing some of the Jewish communities for not recognizing the Messiah in Jesus. So there's this kind of dual criticism that the Quran raises, right? So interesting. And then also errors that were made in terms of practice, right? So for example, the criticism towards the Israelites. Here's an example, a ritual error. All food was permitted to the children of Israel, except for what Israel forbade itself before the Torah was sent down. So there are certain things that the Quran criticizes, practices, theological doctrines. So it's not coming from this vantage point that all paths are valid, but it's basically saying all these revelations, all these traditions originated from a source, but that there are some, there were some things where human interfered and things changed, right? And so human beings are now basically presented with this array of criticism, and so they basically, and then here finally have to make, honestly approach these questions and that criticism and make their final decision about what they want to choose. And here the Quran is very direct. We have assigned a law and a path to each of you. If God had so willed, he would have made you one community, but he wanted to test you through that which he has given you. So ways to do good, you will all return to God and he will make clear to you the matters you differ about. So after presenting all of this, saying, well, we are all one family, and then there are these religious communities which were divinely willed, God sent those messengers. But also what's interesting here, that God willed religious difference. It's part of God's plan and design that religious difference and diversity exists in the world. And it's a test. It's a test to all these communities to sharpen their views and their understandings, and not to just say, well, it's all okay, right? Like, so it's still in the open, but at the end, God will decide about these matters. So that doesn't keep the Muslims off the hook, right? Muslims are still always in this state of fear and hope. So no Muslim will say, wait, I have the salvation ticket, I'm saved, I'm going to paradise directly because you all are wrong. The attitude of a believer is one, at least from a Quranic perspective, of humility, and that you should also not to be sure about your own end, and that you should constantly work to improve yourself and check your inner world and your practices. And the goal is to increase in God consciousness. So while Muslims say the path of Islam is true, and that certain things are not reconcilable with the Quranic beliefs and doctrines, they were still able to amicably live with other religious communities, as history has shown and proven. So their truth claim did not hold them back in living, with other religious communities. In fact, they have expanded that call, right? So Muslims were able to live with Hindu communities and Buddhist communities. So they always erred on the side of caution and compassion, because the Quran specifically said that religious difference is part of the design plan, yet pushing everybody to be conscious about their decisions, where they want to settle on that, on their conceptions of God, and that all are not valid because there are obviously contradictions, right? So the Quran rejects the incarnation, for example. Christianity mostly, right? Majority of Christians hold it dear, and so we or affirm it as a doctrine, right? So how do you come, it's not possible to reconcile that. So for Muslims then, and I think for all of us, the answer is yes and no, right? So it's yes, we are talking about the same God, but there are different conceptions about the divine, and we have to live with that tension, and be honest and authentic about these differences without blurring them Yet, I think there's also, and then I close here, we have a few minutes. The Quran also wants people to engage in healthy dialogue and disagreement in a respectful way, right? It's and not to blur the distinctions. And so I find some of these passages, inspiring. Invite to the way of your Lord with wisdom and kind advice, and only debate with them in the best manner. Surely your Lord knows best who is straight from his way and who's guide. So the idea of forcefully converting people is absent in Islam. Yes, you are a witness of your religion. You come into the dialogue table, you exchange ideas, but at the end of the day, you can still respectfully disagree, and you don't have to try to, pretend that those differences not exist. So the question, I think sometimes we are now at a place where we want to be so embracing of the other that we think making truth claims about our traditions becomes exclusive and intolerant and arrogant, right? And so is there a way to be friends and still say, there are some major differences here, but we have to, have to live with that tension, right? And I remember when I was in a class with Christian students, and the professor asked them, like, is Zainab going to hell because she does not accept Jesus as her savior or as the Son of God? And that was a tricky situation for them, right? But at the end, I made my choice, right? I was presented with the offer, and it's my choice, it's my truth, it's what I want, what I have decided for me, and I can live with, I will have to live with the consequences, right? If it's done in a free, respectful environment where that healthy dialogue and conversation takes place, I think we can then, accept that, right? And I think sometimes we, in interreligious circles, there is this urge to focus a lot on the commonalities, which are stressed here too, but also to say, it's not all reconcilable, and we need to be honest about that as well, because then we will be able to really see each other fully, rather than like trying to not see or neglect the differences. So I'll stop here. Before we close out, I want to give Angela also a chance, because you are all truth ambassadors. So we have this new project that we are hoping that we can have your help on. I mean, it's great. We are doing this great learning. I always feel that this type of dialogue, again, sharpens my own views, deepens my own faith. But we would love for this to have, reach more people, right? Excite them about this interreligious learning enterprise. And a lot of people don't know yet. So maybe you can help us to get the word out. And Angela wanted to share a little bit about a project that we are having. So Angela, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Zainab. Hi, I'm Angela. I'm a Communications and Development Associate here at ICJS. And Christine is going to send in a survey to everyone just to give their reflections at the end of this course. So part of that survey is just a question about whether your congregation might be interested in an 8-minute educational video that we're going to create to kind of highlight some of the principles that Zainab has talked about in this course. So I just wanted to kind of point that question out and direct you to it. So as you're going through the survey, you could maybe think about that, think about your faith communities or other communities that you're a part of. And the survey is really short. It will just take about 3 to 5 minutes. So thank you so much.
Yes, those surveys help us a lot. So if you could fill them out, that would be huge. And if you have ideas about future courses, please. I mean, we are here. We always love to receive your feedback. If you have suggestions, what we can do, what we can learn together, what kind of subjects you're interested in, please let us know. And new courses, new programs are coming up soon. I'll be teaching a course on the Crusades. That's kind of little not so pleasant chapter in our history in January. So there will be a course that we'll be teaching with Ben Sachs and Matt Taylor, awesome colleagues and instructors. So stay tuned for that. Sign up for the newsletter. Stay connected, stay engaged. Bring 1 or 2 friends to our programs, new people. So Would love to see more. And thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for the gift of your time. You're here, for your willingness to learn, to touch on some sensitive topics. And so really grateful. And I hope you have wonderful holidays and stay well. And I hope to see you soon. Thank you.